This beady world, I am SYED SHABAHAT and you are watching Fault Lines. Once again, Narendra Modi's India is reminding us of the fact that not only the worries of Quaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah were right, but also the life of the Muslims in Narendra Modi's fascist India are still at a point of pain and torture. Once again, Bharatiya Janata Party has crossed all limits to make the lives of Muslims unhappy. And this time what has happened has surpassed everyone's expectation. The BJP's spokesperson Nupur Sharma, during a television debate, gave comments about the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam that were insulting and derogatory. Not only it immediately triggered a chain of protest inside India, particularly from the Muslim communities, but also ignited a chain of reaction from across the world, and particularly Arab countries. Saudi Arabia gave a very strong statement and said that these insulting comments need to be corrected. India needs to learn how to respect belief and religions of other countries. Qatar has also given a very serious feedback to the government of India. But important fact is that BJP's government is not taking a very clear position and is not going for an immediate resolve of this solution. Perhaps going soft on this might just change the complexion of their overall strategy. That is to ignite more problems for the Muslims and to keep their Hindutva vote bank intact. Our team has prepared a package. Watch the package before I bring my first guest to the program.
An international diplomatic storm has engulfed India as two high-ranking staffers of India's governing Bharatiya Janata Party publicly made disparaging remarks about Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The comments sparked many protests throughout India, and 15 Muslim nations joined hands to stand against Indian politicians' blatant Islamophobia. Calls for a boycott of Indian goods have also been made on social media in several Arab countries, and Indian products were removed from shelves in some shops in Kuwait. Hundreds of Muslims took to the streets in Uttar Pradesh city of Kanpur to protest against the offensive remarks by the Indian government, and authorities responded with violence. India's ambassadors to Kuwait and Qatar were summoned to receive official notes of protest over the comments, and Pakistan issued a strong démarche to the Indian charge d'affaires in Islamabad. Foreign Office further stated that Pakistan deplores the belated and perfunctory disciplinary action taken by the BJP government against the said officials, which cannot assuage the pain caused to the Muslims. Soon after the diplomatic protest, the Indian government announced that strong action had been taken against the accused, but none of the BJP's leaders came out to issue a strong apology, and the party's Islamophobic policies, actions and statements are already well documented. India under Modi is transforming as a petty, vindictive nation that seeks pleasure in humiliating the minorities and less privileged.
To join me in the first part of my program, I have with me Dr. Eva Radley. She's joining me from Scottish border. She's an author and journalist. I welcome you, Dr. Eva, on to my program.
Thank you very much.
And we are today discussing the wave of Islamophobia in India, something that was initially a point of concern for the Muslims of India, but now is becoming an international issue. I want to hear from you on that.
More than an Islamophobic wave, it's actually the start of a genocidal policy, which has caused alarm around the world. And an organization called Genocide Watch briefed American politicians earlier this year on the dangers of the policies that are coming out of India, which are seeking to make the lives absolutely miserable of the large minority of Muslims living there. In the past, India has not really bothered about the uproar or the furore caused within its own borders. But this latest demonstration of contempt that their political party has shown towards Muslims has created waves, and there is concern now within Narendra Modi's ranks about where this is going to lead following the insulting of our beloved Prophet Muhammad. peace be upon him.
And this general tendency is not only against Muslims, but it is also hitting other minorities in India. We have seen similar complaints coming from the Christian community as well. So, how do you see this problem that is growing on a larger scale for all the minorities living in this vast country?
Well, previously, India has not bothered about public opinion within its own borders. Now, these comments, which were started by the one of the chiefs of the BJP, Nupur Sharma, she thought it was a good idea to mock and deride the most revered human being in Islam. The backlash is having consequences beyond the borders of India. And as you pointed out, a lot of the Arab countries in the Muslim world have stood up and condemned this outpouring of hate towards the Prophet of Islam. Narendra Modi likes to give the impression that he is a global statesman, and he will be concerned about how he is now being perceived in the Muslim world, with countries that he has had strong relationships in the past, including Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Malaysia, but also while he's been schmoozing world leaders from Washington, Moscow, and Beijing, as well as Europe, he has continued to roll out a lot of anti-Muslim policies which have gone unchecked. This time, however, the reaction, I think, will have caught him by surprise, and I'm sure that we will be seeing grovelling apologies coming out of India quite soon, because this call for a boycott of Indian goods is now gaining momentum and must be causing concern in a country which relies heavily on international trade and good relations around the world.
Dr. Eva, as I understood from your conversation, you mean that the reaction that India is actually getting from abroad is something that is more concerning for them, and they have not paid similar attention to the Muslims or the minorities living in their own countries. So do you believe this international response or this international reaction will further exacerbate if India is not going to address this issue timely, as we see India governments slightly reluctant to go for an outright apology?
I think we will get an outright apology very soon from India. In recent years, Modi has presided over a government that has stripped Kashmiris of the special autonomy that they had had for more than 70 years, when he introduced the Anti-Muslim Citizenship Amendment Act as well. I mean, it was quite clear that, the contempt that India holds towards the Muslims, which make up about 15% of the Indian population. And of course, Modi does have a history. He's credited with presiding over the genocidal attacks on the Gujarat community back in 2002, when 2,000 Muslims were systematically killed and more than 200,000 were displaced. But this time, he has had a shock because of the reaction and the swift and characteristic reaction by the Muslim world. I mean, in the last week, led by Qatar, we've seen Kuwait, Oman, Iran, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Libya, Turkey, the Maldives, Iraq, Indonesia, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Pakistan, and Malaysia have all issued statements condemning the actions of these two BJP officials who mocked the Prophet of Islam. These statements were then followed up by condemnation of the OIC, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, and then the Gulf Cooperation Council also joined in. So you've got the GCC countries on board as well. And this sort of unity is unprecedented. We haven't seen it over Kashmir, over Palestine, over the plight of the Uyghur population or the Rohingyas. But this has really brought global condemnation. Obviously, America, Britain, and other European countries are watching and have yet to really make any sort of comments. But this insult to the Prophet of Islam has created this unprecedented reaction. We can always rely on the world's 2 billion Muslims to react, and indeed they have with robust demonstrations. But this is the first time the Muslim rulers around the world have actually collectively...
Dr. Eva, I think you have made a very clear point, and thank you very much for being our guest in today's program. Ladies and gentlemen, this was Dr. Eva on Radley, and she has made some very important points. The last point that she has made is, I believe, most significant one. And that is that for the first time, India is getting an all-out response from most of the Muslim countries, as she has listed it out, starting from Pakistan to Saudi Arabia to Qatar, Kuwait, Libya, Iraq, Turkey, Bahrain, Malaysia, Indonesia. All of these countries have come forward for condemnation. Also, OIC and GCC have joined the party. And this actually means that it has created a kind of diplomatic crisis that India perhaps could not foresee. She made another statement, and that is that she is expecting an outright apology from Modi's India very soon. Let me ask it from my second guest, who is joining me from the United States. He's Rakib Hamid Naik, and he is a Kashmiri American journalist based in the United States. Dr. Rakib, I welcome you to my program. Mr. Rakib, I welcome you to my program.
Thank you so much.
And we are discussing about this very insulting comments made by one of the Indian politicians. My previous guest was of the view that this will soon be compensated by India by making an outright abrupt apology. Do you expect the same from the polity of the country called India?
To be very honest, I don't think that they're going to make such kind of an apology. And I mean, the suspension also shouldn't come as a surprise to people out there. It's just damage control. And on top of it, we need to understand what's the core ideology that is driving India right now. And that ideology is Hindutva, the Hindu nationalism. And Hindu nationalism, Hindu nationalists despise Muslims. And these comments, if they wouldn't have made an uproar internationally, they would have gone unnoticed. And to be very honest, to be very frank, I don't see India making any apology of any sort in near future. And in fact, I think that right now we are talking yesterday only in the state of Jharkhand and Uttar Pradesh, we saw Muslim protesters being shot. At least 2 were killed in Jharkhand and 10 others were injured. And in Uttar Pradesh, hundreds of Muslim men were arrested because they came out on the streets to protest her, Nupur Sharma's blasphemous remarks against Prophet Muhammad.
Rakib, would you agree with me if I say that India would not be able to do that because the entire politics of Narendra Modi and his party is built up on anti-Muslim sentiment. He has been igniting the local constituencies of Hindus to stand up against a Muslim minority, throw them out of India, to convert all of them back to Hinduism. Now, do you believe this is a major reason why they are reluctant to take a clear position on this diplomatic crisis that has blown out of proportions for India?
I totally agree with you, what you're saying, that, of course, I mean, the ideology that is driving right now, it's not just a recent project. It was in making for at least 100 years when RSS was founded in 1925. And as I said earlier, their hatred against minorities, especially Muslims and Christians, is intense. And I've reported from India for a good amount of time, and I've seen on the ground how they have been able to radicalize the young Hindu population. And we're talking about 37% of India that voted BJP to power. And you can imagine, the kind of radicalism there is on the ground, because Islamophobia is one of the core policies of BJP to convert into the political gains. So yeah, of course, their ideology of hate, and on top of that, what we are witnessing right now in India is not just Islamophobia in plain, but it is a process that is actually going to lead to the genocide of country's 200 million Muslims. And a lot of human rights groups based in the US have warned the global international community that such a thing is quite possible in near future.
Mr. Rakib, also the fact that in this part of world, we see India and United States as partners on so many fronts. They're even partners against, in a coalition against China. They're trade partners. They're partners in investment. And all of this going together gives us a feeling that United States always try to, look on the other side of the picture when there is something going on in India, which requires a clear stance by United States. Now, how do you believe this time United States is going to respond to the development that has recently taken place in India?
To be honest, I live in the U.S. and I know, a lot of human rights groups. They are very concerned about what's happening on the ground in India since last 8 years, and the U.S. government, especially last week only, during the release of International Religious Freedom Report by the United States Department of State, Secretary Blinken explicitly named India and mentioned that the attacks on minorities and their places of worship are happening in India. It was the first time that Secretary outrightly named India for its egregious violations of human rights and religious freedom. And then the International Religious Freedom Ambassador, Rashid Hussain, also called out the Indian government officials for being complicit in targeted attacks on religious minorities. So the US government is waking up to what's happening in India, and that's a very welcoming step and a development. And on top of that, the country's top human rights and civil rights groups are closely monitoring what's happening on the ground, including Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, Freedom House, U.S. Holocaust Museum, Genocide Watch, and a lot of Indian diaspora organizations in the U.S. So what's happening in India is being closely monitored, and in near future you would see some major step being taken by the United States government against India for its violations of religious freedom of its minorities.
Very heartening to learn that. But Rakib, also tell us how the rest of the West is seeing into the rise of Hindutva in India. Is the rest of the West equally concerned about these developments?
See, it depends who you are talking to, but in general, so this is what has happened over the past so many decades, especially in the West. These Hindu nationalists in the Western countries have been able to infiltrate into these progressive circles by hiding their real intentions and the kind of ideology they support. And right now they have a big, huge infrastructure in place that allows them to influence policy decisions, foreign policy decisions of the US, or let's say in the UK or other European countries. So they've been able to penetrate, and so the way the people see India is like a world's largest democracy. They do a lot of good stuff. They're into spirituality, yoga, and a lot of cultural things. But the real thing is that education, that awareness was missing for a very long time. But nowadays, policymakers especially, they know what's happening on the ground. But people also, they are getting to know that the situation in India is very dire, and countries, 200 million Muslims are staring at an impending genocide.
Thank you very much, Raqib Hamid, for being guest in our program. Ladies and gentlemen, this was Raqib Hamid from United States, and he came up with a beautiful line of argument. He also told us that United States is increasingly getting uncomfortable. And, the important thing that he mentioned is that even the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, this time had to make an open statement about the developments in India that are disturbing for United States. We're taking a break here and we'll join you back with the second segment of program. Stay with us.
Sarangi is a bowed, short-necked string instrument from subcontinent, which is used in Pakistani classical music. Its flexible tunability and its ability to produce a large play of tonal color and emotional nuance makes it unique. Carved from a single block of wood, the sarangi has a box-like shape with three hollow chambers called stomach, chest and brain. It's usually around 2 feet long and around
Welcome back. Amid a lot of criticism and a lot of hue and cry made from all the corners, Pakistan's parliament on 10th of June has presented a budget that has an estimate of 9.5 trillion rupees of expenditure. This budget has been presented at a time when Pakistan was facing a very dire economic situation. For most of the people who are not familiar with the subject of economics, budget is like a jugglery of many figures and statistics, and we need the help of experts to understand how this budget is going to affect life of common people. I have once again invited Mr. Osama Rizvi. He is an analyst based in Lahore, appears in my show frequently. And Osama, I welcome you again to my program. Osama, first things first, this budget has been presented, and ever since it has been presented, all the major news outlets are talking about it. People are taking different aspects of the budget and criticizing it in a way or another. So what is your take on it? What are your feelings about this budget holistically? How does it look like, apparently?
Yes, so it's a very interesting question. I would like to, there is enough analysis in terms of numbers, and, I'd like to cut through the noise of numbers, but just give you my general opinion, first of all. I think the budget is pragmatic, but once again, there is nothing which was unexpected in it. You, me, all of us, we have had this discussion before. We knew that it is going to be what is called a contractionary fiscal policy. Fiscal policy is, of course, the budget. So, by contractionary, I mean that taxes were going to increase and the government spending was supposed to come down. And this is exactly what happened. We all know that the PSDP, Public Sector Development Program, the main expenditure for the people, for the masses, the part that accounts for this has been reduced, whereas taxes has been increased. So the new tax target now is 7 trillion, so which I believe is unrealistic, but we will talk about it as we move forward. But overall, it was a pragmatic budget, but there was nothing unusual. It is not very, not very rosy, not very positive. If anyone thinks that, I think it is delusional. I believe as more details become available, we will see a lot of pain, not only for the common man, but also for the businesses as well.
Osama, before I proceed to my next question, your statement that you made about tax collection, you said 7,000 billion is slightly unrealistic, too good to be true in terms of the revenue that we have to collect. So why do you believe? Because see, FPR has done a remarkable job in the last year. We had two different governments, and both of these governments remained appreciative of the effort, of the results that FPR has produced. So amid all of this, why you are not as optimistic as other people are toward FBR's capacity to meet this target?
So that's very interesting, actually. So if you read the budget, one of the highlights was that the tax to GDP ratio will be around 9.2%. So that is almost similar to what we have had this year and the previous year as well. So the point here is to understand is that it is not wise, or it is not advisable, especially in times like these, to tax the all who are already paying the taxes. So you can play with what the government right now is doing, or the previous government even, or before that, what our trend has mostly been is to manipulate with the tax brackets, the tax rates, but we do not go for the tax base, right? What happens? Two things. First, it becomes difficult to squeeze the already taxed people, salaried class, those who have, on a lighter note, committed this mistake of getting registered to become filer. And secondly, the second thing is that there is a lot of political capital that is lost in doing so. On the other hand, if the budget would have said that the tax to GDP ratio will be increased, let's say to 11%, for context, it should be around 15% for a good tax base. In a developing world, the tax rate should be 15%. Then I would have been optimistic. Other than that, I don't. And even if we reach somewhere near to that level, and as you mentioned, FBR has been very efficient in collecting its taxes. But you break down that number, most of the taxes were from imports. Our growth figures, even 6% growth, the growth story, everyone is talking about it. It is import-led. It is not consumption-led. So the facts and figures at times, most of the times, they are quite delusional. They give you an illusion without a proper context. So if you see our 6% import growth, it was import-led. If you see the recent increase in taxation, it was due to imports. I think 54% of increase was because of imports, if I'm not mistaken. So that is why I said what I said. I mean, even if it happens, even if we reach near to that level, it will have lots of consequences for people around all across Pakistan. It's not a good approach. It's not an approach that we would opt for a longer term. I mean, you have to increase the tax to GDP ratio.
Point well taken, Osama. Let's move forward on that. So, inflation remained broadly between 13 to 14% with the end of the previous financial year. And for this year, the target has been set to 11%. Now, looking at the international involvement, the global community that we all reside in, looking at the numbers of petrol prices, fuel prices, food prices from around the world, how do you believe the inflation situation will remain in Pakistan and the general price index for common people? Do you believe it will be the toughest of our financial years?
Yeah, once again, a very interesting question. I believe, first of all, the 11% inflation target is quite unrealistic. It is, there is no way, unless a miracle happens, there is no way that we end up having 11% inflation. We are already at 13.8%, and expectations are, and I've written about it 2 months ago, that expectations are that in summer, which we are experiencing right now, we will touch 15%. And the recent developments in the international arena, especially the US, the recent GDP inflation figures, the consumer price index, it tells us a very different story. It tells us that we will face even tougher challenges this year than the previous year. Because if you allow me, I'd like to explain. So yesterday, in the New York Times, there was a headline that US CPI, which is Consumer Price Index, rose the most in past 40 years. So we know that Federal Reserve Bank of America, the central bank of the US, it has been increasing rates to bring down the inflation. And they were expecting that inflation will come down as we move forward. However, these figures portray a different case. So now the international markets are expecting an even aggressive fiscal or monetary policy by the Federal Reserve Bank of America. Amongst many other things, one thing that it does, it makes dollars stronger. Dollar is already at its 2-year highs. So if you look at our budgetary targets, all of those targets will go awry just because of this one factor. Dollar will keep getting stronger. If it happens, we can see, I've said it in your program as well, I think, 300 rupees per petrol. And if crude prices, another international factor, it goes up until 150, which I'm expecting, the Citibank is expecting. Imagine what will be the case here in Pakistan. Will inflation go down or come down, or will it even enhance further? So that's my point of view on that. It's
Point taken. Osama, important thing is that when any country is trying to grow more money, try to grow more capital, primarily what it can do is it can invest into the businesses in that country. The foreign direct investment and the local investment have to be fortified, protected and garnered. Now in this budget, there are certain steps taken to make Pakistan a more business friendly country. Have you had a look at these strategies adopted in this budget, and how convinced you are with the steps taken by the government?
So yes, I mean, it will depend upon the nature of the business you would ask. I mean, the step to repeal the tax duty on solar panels, it was a step in the right direction given the energy crunch we're feeling. Amongst other things, the ease of doing business will be improved somehow, somewhat. But once again, the prime issue for our businessmen, for the industry, the main issue is only one, that is energy. So unless our government, this one or the next one or the next one, they don't resolve the energy crisis, we won't see businesses growing. Businessmen may become happy for such and such measures, tax exemptions and provision of other things, but until and unless there is no energy to the industry, to the large-scale manufacturing sector, to the textile industry, even to the agriculture, we won't see a proper business growth, period. That cannot happen. That is the most important, most significant input that goes into this whole equation, into this whole system. So until and unless we resolve that, it isn't happening. And how do we resolve that? Of course, in the short term, there is no answer. I don't have an answer. But in the longer run, there are lots of answers. We need to change our energy mix. We need to bring in more innovation. But these are long-term strategies, but they have to be kicked off at some point. That is what I always try to highlight. They need to be initiated.
So Osama, given all of the above that we have already discussed, how would the future remain to be? I mean, in this financial year, what do you expect to happen in Pakistan in terms of our general economic environment? How stable or unstable the economic environment will remain to be at large?
Yes. So World Bank recently brought down its estimate of the global growth, global GDP growth to 2.9. And for emerging markets, and Pakistan is one of them, the estimate has been curtailed by 50%. So it was expected. In 2021, it grew by 6.6%. In 2022, it is expected to grow 3.3%, which is even below the average of 4.8% that has been kept from 2001 to 2018 and 19. So Pakistan is part of that, and things are even worse in Pakistan than many other emerging economies. That said, as an extension of it, I think the remaining year is going to be even tougher. I've always said this, and I don't have any, I don't take any pleasure in saying this, but it will get worse before it gets better. I'm talking about a sort of food crisis in Pakistan in terms of availability of wheat and grain and rice and other perishable items. We're talking about 300 rupee petrol prices. We're talking about even further falling reserves, hence currency depreciation. So these things will continue to haunt us for the good amount of remaining year. But if steps are taken in the right direction, if political gains are put on the back burner and things are being done for the greater purpose, in the longer run, after a year or so, we might see some stability. Not before that, unfortunately.
Thank you very much, Osama Rizvi, for being guest in our program. Ladies and gentlemen, this was my guest, Osama Rizvi from Lahore, and he had his own point of view about the budget that has been presented in Pakistan's parliament. While many experts are not happy with the economic outlook of the country and they all agree that it remained widely dismal, let me remind you that the world has always been observing the ups and downs of the economies. There have been tough and good times in the history of the economics of this world, in the history of nations, as well as in the history of our economic system. We all have seen the fall of the recession of 2008, and then whatever crises have been created out of COVID and Russia-Ukraine war. One thing remains for sure, that Pakistan has the resilience to come out of all of these crises. We'll join you next week with another program. And until then, Allah Hafiz.